So what's been happening in the Sydney property market and what's likely to happen going through into September? So let's have a look at that. So there were some trends in August that we can see. There would be positive signals for the property market, but we need to be mindful that there are some factors that caveat those results. So firstly, we're seeing strong clearance rates. The clearance rates have typically been in the mid-70s, potentially the high 70s. In the most recent weekend, they in fact touched 80%. That's a very positive signal, and an 80% clearance rate is a very strong signal about buyer confidence in the market. So that's telling us some positive news about the property market. However, we need to be mindful of a couple of factors. Firstly, the number of properties coming to market has actually been relatively low. This is even in the most recent weekend where there was that 80% clearance rate, but the number of properties coming to market was actually quite small compared to many prior weekends and also compared to other years. So we need to take that into account when evaluating clearance rates. Basic supply and demand tells us that when you don't have that many properties on the market, but you have the same number of buyers, you're going to get a higher clearance rate, or potentially higher prices. In this case, it's manifesting in higher clearance rates. Of course, I'll get to prices in a second. Now, when we're looking at prices, we can see those have kind of stabilized. Prices haven't really shot up over the past few months. They've hovered around the same level. There's been a week-by-week fluctuation, of course. Median prices at auctions have changed, obviously by week to week, but there hasn't really been a significant positive trend over the past few months. What this is telling us is prices are flatlining, despite the fact that there are higher clearance rates and fewer properties. So this is kind of telling us that while buyers are interested and vendors are somewhat interested in bringing their properties to market, this isn't translating to higher prices. This is telling us to some extent that people are interested, but not really interested in paying more. So it remains to be seen what will happen in spring, particularly in September as more properties come to market. Because if we see in the late part of August, while there are a number of auctions scheduled, quite a few of those auctions didn't actually occur. So that kind of tells us that some vendors still aren't confident about what will happen at auction. Either they're accepting something beforehand because they're not confident of the price at auction, and or they just don't think there'll be many interested buyers. So as we get more and more properties coming to market, we might see more withdrawals and less confidence on the part of vendors, or a greater willingness to accept a lower price due to the sheer number of other properties competing for buyer attention. So what does that mean into spring? Well, it means as we get more properties coming to market, one would probably expect a drop-off in clearance rates and or a slight drop-off in prices by simple supply and demand, in that you don't magically create more buyers simply by bringing more properties to market. So clearance rates simply can't increase if you don't have more buyers in the market. So this tells us that probably clearance rates would need to decrease a little bit simply due to supply and demand. So let's look at some of the overarching drivers here. So if we think about the positive drivers for the market, the positive drivers that have helped contribute to that increase in clearance rates would include things such as the RBA cutting rates by 50 basis points, which makes debt cheaper, both existing debt and future debt. Even though banks haven't fully passed on those rate cuts, they have to a large extent. Secondly, we have APRA changing its serviceability requirements to reduce those serviceability requirements. So whereas people would be previously assessed on whether they could repay the debt at 7% or higher, now to be assessed on whether they could repay it at the interest rate plus 250 basis points. Then we have the continued on-flow effect of the federal election, where the coalition's surprise positive victory was a positive signal for the market, suggesting that vendors were more willing to bring properties to market and buyers were more willing to perhaps purchase, given that they no longer feared adverse changes to property taxation. So those are the general positive signals for the property market. There are some factors that keep a lid on growth though, and the main factor keeping a lid on growth at the moment is really wage growth, in that while interest rates have been cut, that doesn't make that much of a difference really to repayments, especially when people's wages aren't actually increasing and the cost of living in other spheres, such as utilities, is increasing. So people aren't really seeing a significant increase in their take-home pay that they can spend on property. This means they can't really afford much of an increase in property prices. So there's really going to be a limit to how much the boom can really go on, in that we're going to see a positive signal in that buyers appear to be returning to the market and vendors appear to be willing to sell, but there's a limit to how much prices can really increase without an additional increase in purchasing power. So I hope this has given you some idea about what happened in August, the positive signs that have occurred, but some factors we need to think about when really assessing those to evaluate how positive they really are. I hope it's also given you some insight into what might happen into spring, and some of the factors that, while they might drive the market in a positive direction, some other factors that might limit the extent to which we're going to get much of a price increase. So I hope the video has been interesting to you. If it has, it would be great if you click the like and subscribe buttons, and I hope to see you next time.